Awesome. Am I on? Yes, I am. Excellent. Good. Well, we had you guys come up a little bit closer because you got to understand, I'm used to talking to youth, and so I'm used to throwing things. I'm used to showing a lot of stuff. So I'm a very visual learner. I might be a little ADHD also. You'll probably learn that sometime tonight. And so I love showing things. I want you to see creation. I don't want to just talk about it. I want you to see it. And so we're going to pull up my slides here, and we're going to be talking tonight about it just doesn't take millions of years. And this is a foundational message that just shows us that all the icons of evolution, everything that you've been taught, all the icons of evolution, we didn't connect over here. Let's check real quick here. There we go. Now we're connecting. There we go. Ta-da! Okay. So this talk just kind of goes through and shows us that all these icons of evolution that we've been taught, the rock layers, the fossils, diamonds and oil and coal. Diamonds are supposed to be a girl's best friend, right? They take millions of years in the pit of a volcano until it comes up just so you can show your wife how much you love her. That's a bunch of baloney. Okay, now I'll get into that, all right? It's even more fun than that. Just wait. So today we're going to talk about creation. So if you don't know what ICR is, it stands for the Institute for Creation Research. It was started 50 years ago by a couple of guys, one named Dwayne Gish. Used to go out and, debate professors at universities all the time. Another guy, Henry Morris, who wrote a book, The Genesis Record and then The Genesis Flood. And most creationists alive today point to him as to why they are creationists. So your Ken Hams, all your guys from CMI, they point to that original book that actually made them realize, hey, the global flood is the best answer for what we're seeing around us. Okay? And so we'll talk a little bit about that. We want to talk about how not just in Ireland, that's a beautiful picture from Ireland, but none of these icons of evolution take millions of years. What it really takes is just two things. It takes the right materials and the right environment. Let me say that again because we're going to talk about that a lot today. The right materials and the right environment. Now, before we get into breaking down these icons of evolution, there's usually kind of a elephant in the room as why biblical creation? Why does Dave come up here? I don't know if you guys know this. I'm from Dallas, Texas, okay? Yeah, okay? Okay, thank you. I was a little worried there. I was like, okay, cool, all right. We feel sorry for you guys here in California. We want to bring you back, especially the Calvary Chapel people, not some of the others, but especially the Calvary Chapel people. So you got to understand, before I did this, I sold guns and body armor and ammunition to law enforcement for several years. So I'm big into 2A, and I come out here, and I always hear about Governor Newsom. A wonderful man, if this is being recorded. A wonderful man. And I hear about, and then I get here and I'm like, everybody's so awesome. I mean, it's beautiful. The people are amazing. And so it seems really cool when you're here. And then you hear about it on the news and you're like, yep, that's why I came back to Texas. Okay. So the thing is, I flew in here and it was supposed to be cool. I was ripped off. Okay. Someone lied to me. All right, in California, y'all are supposed to be cooler than Texas, and y'all are actually a couple degrees hotter than in Texas. So I've just been sweating the whole time. It's been amazing. So that has nothing to do with biblical creation. That's just a little bit about me. So the question is, why biblical creation? And the reason is because it's actually drawing people away from God. What's happening right now is drawing people away from God. People like Hugh Ross and William Lane Craig, they're drawing people away from God because they're putting doubt in their minds. I just watched a video about Hugh Ross. Well, it was Eric Hovind and Hugh Ross. They were on a podcast. You see, ICR says that science confirms the Bible. That's the order that it should be in. Science confirms the Bible. The Bible doesn't need science necessarily, but we can actually do science, and it confirms the Bible. all the men who started the disciplines of science, chemistry. Robert Boyle was the founder of the modern father of chemistry. You've got Kepler, who was astronomy. All these men did science not because they were trying to disprove God. It's because they believed that there was a creator, and they wanted to know how he ordered this universe. They wanted to know how he created this world. And they figured that if they can do the science, they'll figure out more about the creation and the creator. That's why they started doing science. And so you've got these guys who, instead of saying, hey, science confirms the Bible, Hugh Ross got busted just not too long ago because Eric Hovind was saying, hey, you've interpreted the Bible this way, and it matches up with science. But what if this happened? What if all the scientists came together and said, you know what? The earth is young. And all the science pointed to the earth being young. Would you then go back and reinterpret the Bible to show that it was young? He said, yes. Did you hear what he just said? He just said that he was reinterpreting the Bible based on what man said. And that's the wrong order. We actually say science confirms the Bible. It's an authority issue. I don't question Hugh Ross's salvation, and I don't question William Lane Craig's salvation or anything like that. But it's an authority issue, and it will draw people away. Here's why I'm saying that. This is Richard Lewontin. Now, he's an evolutionary biologist. He used to work at Harvard University. He has this big, long quote that it's hard to read because it's long, but it's really key to understanding why I do what I do. Let me read it to you. It says this. Oops, go back. There we go. It says this. Our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense is the key to an understanding of the real struggle between science and the supernatural. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just-so stories, because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. He finishes with this. It is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, this is the most important sentence of the whole thing, moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. You realize what he just said? I don't care how stupid the answer sounds. I don't care how crazy it is. I don't care if it's even wrong. The answer will never be God. That's what he just told you. So when we say, hey, they're just following the science, well, that's kind of a loaded term now, but you know what I mean? You know, when they say, hey, they're just following the science, they're not just following the science. They have a presupposition. They have a worldview that says it will never be God. And that's a real problem. It's not just the scientists, so they're actually bringing this in to our pastors and to our families and to our children, okay? This is Dr. Jerry Bergman. He's a creationist now. He used to be an atheist, and he was the editor of an atheist magazine. He wrote this: when I was an atheist, as we often said, evolution is the doorway to atheism. In our atheist magazine, we talked more about evolution than practically anything else. We realized if you sell them evolution, many of them, or most of them, will choose Darwinism and atheism. They're using evolution as a gateway drug to atheism, to convince you and your children that you don't need God. God is no longer needed. We've proven that the Bible is not true through science. Now, that's completely false, but that's what they're trying to convince people of. Now, it gets into our pastors, too. This is a Pastors and Biblical Worldview Survey, American Worldview Inventory 2022. They actually created a survey that tested pastors on 7 different categories of having a biblical worldview, 7 different categories. When they gave them the survey, They said pastors holding a consistent biblical worldview overall, all 7 categories, 37%. Yeah, that should be a little like, Now, I'm sure not your pastor, not your pastors, but some of these pastors. Now, they did go back and say, okay, what about if we just said, what if they held a biblical worldview on the Bible, truth, and morality? Just those 3. I mean, these should be the pillars. These should be the ones that we know that we know that we know. Okay? Now, it did jumped up to 39%. That's a scary thing. These are the guys who are supposed to know that they know. They're the ones teaching us. They're the ones teaching our children. And yet they're allowing this worldview to seep in. Evolution seeps in even into creation. I'll show you that here in just a second. You think about it, even our most famous pastors, people like Andy Stanley, Charles's son. Andy Stanley did a series called Who Needs God? He wrote this: we're hypocrites. If we lean into science for our health, why would we reject science in any other capacity? He goes on. He's talking about evolution. He goes on and says, if your faith and science are in conflict, you don't have a science problem. You have a faith problem, he says. That's not good. That's not good at all. Even Pope Francis gets in on this. So this is an article they wrote about Pope Francis. It says, the Big Bang and evolution are not only consistent with biblical teachings, Pope Francis told the Vatican gathering, they are essential to understanding God. When we read about creation in Genesis, we run the risk of imagining God was a magician with a magic wand able to do everything, but that is not so. The Pope says that. Now, that's not the God that we read about in the Bible, is it? The God we read about says he will do exceedingly abundantly and above all that we can think or even we can ask or even think. That's the God we read about in the Bible. But that's not the Bible, the God that the Pope's talking about. Think about William Lane Craig, great apologist. Don't get me wrong when I say these things. Great apologist. Don't question his salvation. He gets it very wrong on creation. He wrote in a book this. Now, we all know how long it takes for, say, apple trees to grow and blossom and bear fruit. Unless we're to imagine this occurring as in time-lapse photography, like in Walt Disney's movie, The Living Desert, where plants spring out of the ground and blast into maturity and blossom and fruit pops out, then this must have taken longer than 24 hours. The God that created the world has to have more than 24 hours? What he's saying is, I have to have a natural answer. I've got to have a natural answer for the miracle of creation week. That's what all these guys are saying. I have to have a natural answer. I need more time. But that's a slippery slope. If you need more time and you want natural answers, what's your natural answer for Jesus walking on water? What's your natural answer for the virgin birth? That's uncomfortable. We'll move on. What's your natural answer for Jesus rising from the dead? See, you're on a slippery slope when you start saying you've got to have a natural answer. You're saying, I have to have more time. And that's what's happening right now is people are trying to figure out how they can get more time. They look at science that has told us, hey, it had nothing to do with God. You guys don't understand. It had nothing to do with God over millions of years. Why do they have to have millions of years? Because if they told you you evolved out of slime on a rock in 6,000 years, you'd look at them like they were idiots. And rightly so. They know that. That's why they have to have millions of years and billions of years. That's why when they date the rocks, millions of years, billions of years, and yet radioisotope dating is wrong, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. So if it's not a gap between day one and day two, one of the biggest ones is let's just slap millions of years into each day. I mean, that word day doesn't necessarily have to be a 24-hour period. It could be like back in my father's day, right? Back in my father's day, it was this. Well, how do we know? And how do we know whether it means 6 24-hour days or 6 periods like back in my father's day? It's context within the actual writing itself, right? You think about it. Every single one of those says, and there was evening and there was morning the first day. There was evening and there was morning the second day. So it always has a number. It's numbering the day, and it always defines the day, evening and morning. So in the Jewish calendar, evening comes first, then it's morning. In our calendar, it's morning, then evening. Morning to evening, right? So he defined, it's like God knew we were going to be dense, right? And he was like, just in case, let me tell you, it's evening and morning is the first day. The problem is this. Not only do we get all the same context clues, every single one says day, every single time he defines the word day. If you still try to stuff millions of years into the word day, you actually do two things. Number one, you made the cross of Christ irrelevant, and you defamed the I can't even think of the word I'm trying to say now. You make the cross of Christ irrelevant, and you're actually going to defame God's character. Okay? I'll put it that way. Let me show you what I mean by that. In Romans 5:12-21, it says, "Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned, that as sin hath reigned unto death, even so might grace reign through righteousness unto eternal life by Jesus Christ our Lord." Watch what Paul says here. He says, sin entered into the world, and death by sin. In other words, death is a special punishment for sin. And until that punishment came, death was not there. Death came because of sin. Okay? You think about it. You've got biblical creation. God had 6 days of creation. He says it is good, except for the second day. The sixth day, he looks at everything and says it is very good. The only reason it becomes not very good is when Adam sins, and we were all corporately condemned under Adam, right? Have you ever been out witnessing and people are like, well, I don't sin. And we're like, let's call your mother and see if you've sinned, okay? So we're all corporately condemned under the first Adam, only so we can then be saved corporately by the second Adam. Okay? Now we have to accept that sacrifice. We have to accept that salvation, but it is Jesus, the second Adam, who saves us all, right? So here's the problem. So Jesus dies, right? That's how we fill the gap between us and God. You understand that God isn't sitting there and saying, I don't like the way you look. I don't like the way you smell. I don't like the way your hair is. He's not doing that. When he says that you can't get into heaven, it's because he's God. He is a perfect Trinity, right? Father, Son, Holy Spirit. He's perfect. He says, I cannot allow sin in my presence. So if he allows you in as a sinner, he is no longer who he says he is. We can no longer trust him. He says, I cannot allow you in my presence. That's that gap. And that's why Jesus died on the cross, so that you can bridge that gap. You can have eternity in heaven with God. Okay? Hell wasn't made for you. Do you get that? Hell was never made for you. Doesn't mean you won't go there if you don't accept the sacrifice. If you can't become positionally perfect, when you accept that sacrifice, you're now positionally perfect, and you can now be there with God. But if we don't accept that sacrifice, we are not positionally perfect, and we will go the only other place you can go, and that's hell. But God didn't make it for you. Know that today. He didn't make it for you. So what happens when we stuff millions of years into Genesis? So we go into evolution. Now, what is evolution? It's millions of years stuffed into each day. So now you have long periods of time. And so evolution basically is death, disease, and suffering. Okay, Richard Dawkins, one of the most famous atheists, says it's blind, pitiless indifference. That's what evolution is. Blind, pitiless indifference. There's no purpose. There's no direction, nothing. Blind, pitiless indifference. So you have millions of years of death, disease, and suffering. You're going to malign the character of God because you're going to say that he looked out over the millions of years from the period of day one, looks out over millions of years of death, disease, and suffering and says, it is good? Is that the God we read about in the Bible? No, it's not. See, you malign the character of God. Malign was the word I was definitely trying to think of, right? You malign the character of God when you stuff those millions of years into Genesis. You do something even worse, though. Watch. So now you've got millions of years of death, disease, and suffering. It's no longer a special punishment for sin, is it? It's an everyday occurrence. Steve Jobs says death is one of the best things for progress. But if it's an everyday occurrence and it's no longer special punishment for sin, then why in the world did Jesus die on the cross? You make the cross of Christ irrelevant, and you malign the character of God when you try and stuff millions of years into Genesis. That's a real problem. We don't want to do that. See, everybody seems to ask the question, how did God create in only 6 days? This is the God that stopped the sun, that parted the Red Sea, raised Lazarus from the dead, raised Jesus. And we're asking, how did he create in only 6 days? We're asking the wrong question. We should ask, why did it take so long? Right? He speaks and things leap into existence. He could have spoken and it could have come about within seconds. But he does it in an order. He does it for a purpose for us. And we need to understand that. Probably some of you have met scientists that look like this guy. He looks like he knows how to party, right? Yeah, I mean, yeah. And he's the guy who's sitting there saying, man, science proves evolution. Evolution's a scientific fact. Evolution has science on its side. You just have fairy tales, okay? You just have fairy tales. But here's a question. What can science really tell us? What can science really tell us? Think about this. So I love my Mac stuff, my Apple stuff. I have Mac everything. There's an Apple TV back there, so I can wirelessly run this thing back there to your projector. I've got the Apple iPhone. I've got Apple everything. Now, normally I buy it used because I don't have new Apple money, just so you know that, okay? But I love my Mac stuff. We love medicine. We love space shuttles, so we're about to go back to the moon. Elon Musk is going to take us to Mars before too long. I don't know if you understand this. Elon Musk has been launching things into orbit. They've had over 200 successful launches. Like Elon Musk is getting to the point where he's going to start yawning the next time they launch something. That's how much he's been doing it. But all of this science is good operational science. It's observable and it's repeatable. In other words, all 5-10 of us can watch it and we see the same thing. And every time we redo it, we get the same results. Okay? It's observational and it's repeatable. That is good operational science. But what about if you were to talk about the origins of man or the origins of the universe? Raise your hand if you've created your own universe. Some of us in our mind, okay? If you've created, I made the mistake of saying, how many of you have created life? And, well, people have had babies, but that's what I mean is from scratch, right? From scratch. Anybody? No? That's good. Usually pastors will raise their hand just to mess with me, okay? But the problem is none of us were there. We don't know what happened. And so we can't use operational science because we can't observe the origin of man. We can't observe the origin of the universe. So we have to use something that we would call, like forensic science or what we would call historical science. In other words, we have to take the facts and then see what the facts line up best with. There's really only two basic worldviews. There's either biblical creation or there's evolution. Now, we can go into the multiverse, but the multiverse is really just a way to get away from the fine-tuning of our universe. It's just an excuse to get away from that. But you're really just pushing out the problem of fine-tuning by going into the multiverse. You can go into aliens, but you're really just pushing back the problem of evolution. Because you can say, well, your evolution doesn't happen on Earth. Well, the aliens seeded it. Okay, yeah, but then how did the aliens get there? You're just pushing back your problem by creating these answers. There's really only two answers, either biblical creation or evolution, okay? And so we're going to look at the facts and see what it lines up best with. Pretty sure, spoiler alert, it's going to be creation. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. But we're going to take a look at some icons of evolution. Rock layers, fossils, and what I call DOC. Not the Department of Corrections. It's actually diamonds, oil, and coal. Those are icons of evolution that are supposed to be taking millions of years, and yet they don't. Let's take a look at rock layers. When we take a look at rock layers, we can actually see like the Grand Canyon. This is the Grand Canyon, but if you take a look, this is actually really low in the Grand Canyon. This is the river that runs through it. The prevailing theory was that this river, over millions of years, cut out the Grand Canyon. We're going to see that that's just a stupid answer, really. I'll show you that here in a minute. But you can see this is low. You can see that it goes way high up there, okay? But this is the Grand Canyon. Understand that conventional scientists believe that most of the rock layers in the Grand Canyon were laid down by water. Does that give you a hint? Global flood, right? They believe it was laid down by water. The only layer that they can test, so this is actually a picture I took. I've been able to go out there a couple times. This is a picture from the South Rim. The only layer that they can test is the Coconino sandstone, just that tan, light tan color that you're looking there. They say that was laid down by wind. Everything else, they say it was laid down by water. A big hint is that we have a lot of marine fossils in the layers. That's a big hint that it was laid down by water, okay? But Coconino sandstones don't necessarily have the marine life in them, but they do have something called cross-bedding. And I won't go into it right now, but the way cross-bedding works, if it's a certain degree or above, then it's wind. If it's a certain degree below, it's water. So guess what? Dr. Thomas, who will be coming in September, actually takes people down to the Grand Canyon, takes them straight over to the cross-bedding of the Coconino sandstones, hands them a projector, one of those little projector thingies, and lets you stick it up there, and you go, that's laid down by water. Every single layer of the Grand Canyon is laid down by water. We can see that through good operational, observational science, okay? So if you take a look at the Grand Canyon, so you can say all of this is strata, and then each one of these little layers, actually you can kind of go in right here. You can see here where each one of the bigger layers is made up of little bitty layers, just little bitty thin layers like this. That stratum, they say, can take like 1,000 years. That one little bitty layer can take like 1,000 years brought in by wind, okay? That's their theory. Well, how do they get to that? Because then think about it. You've got 1,000 years for each one of these. That means one of these big ones has got to be tens to hundreds of thousands of years. Then by the time you go 2 miles up, you're talking about billions of years. So that kind of makes sense, but how do they get to that? Well, they use something called uniformitarianism. Big fancy word that says the way it's happening today is the way it happened in the past. Now, here's a question. Do they know that, or do they think that? They're the side of science. They're the big scientists, but guess what? They've never seen the Grand Canyon form through natural, slow processes. So they don't know that, they think that. The big bag scientist is basically guessing. Now, if anybody is an evolutionist or an old earther in here, please, if I say something like that, don't think that I'm trying to say anything bad about you. But I'm going to point things out, and I'm going to be adamant about it. So please, if you want to come up to me afterwards and talk, we can. So uniformitarianism, the side of science, is actually a guess. But they say that it's science. The trick is that we've found that there's another way that we know how things like this are created. We've actually seen it. We're not guessing. We've seen it happen. We call it catastrophism. In other words, a massive catastrophe can actually create the things that we see around us. Now, we figured that out by Mount St. Helens. We watched Mount St. Helens explode, and we watched the recovery. And we watched a mini Grand Canyon form because of it. We've watched it, this catastrophe, actually form all the same features as the Grand Canyon. So catastrophism is actually a good observational science. It's actually a good answer. So Mount St. Helens is still technically an active volcano. It's in Washington State up there in the northwest, okay, way up there. Okay, the original eruption was in 1980. The major events is the mini Grand Canyon. We watched the layers being laid down and how long it took. We watched the water and mud come through and cut through that hardened layering and create a canyon. They literally call it like it's like a 1/20th scale or something like that of the Grand Canyon. But there's something interesting that we can see. You think about it. There has to be some kind of catastrophe that would create something like this worldwide, because this is a worldwide effect. We need a worldwide cause. Can anybody think about a giant catastrophe in the Bible that happened? The global flood. If you were youth, I would throw a dinosaur at you or something like that. I actually have pieces of hadrosaur. I'll think of something good, and you can get a piece of hadrosaur bone. So the global flood. The global flood would be a catastrophe that would actually be a worldwide cause. Therefore, it would be a worldwide effect. But wait a second. I just got to stop right here. Not this global flood. Not this Noah's flood, okay? That's what I was taught in school, in Sunday school, right? All the animals are stuffed in there. They're smiling, you know. They're just hanging out. Everybody's smiling, sunshine, rainbows. Is that what the Bible says about the global flood? No, not at all. Let's take a look for just a second. Genesis 7:11 says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. Two things about that verse. Number one, why does he give us a date? Anybody have a thought about that? Say it again. It's historical. What? Somebody said something over here. Say it again. Spring. So what I would say is God wants us to know that it is historical. He wants us to understand it. He wants us to be able to understand what the global flood was. Because when I was in Sunday school, what I was taught is that it was 40 days and 40 nights of rain. Did you guys learn that? 40 days and 40 nights of rain. That was just to lift the ark up off the ground. 40 days and 40 nights of rain was just to lift the ark up off the ground. At 150 days, it says that it covered all the mountains up to over 15 cubits. Okay? It had just covered all the mountains at 150 days. Some of us have actually learned that it was supposed to be 150 days. It was much longer. If you go back to where he walks off the ark with his family, it gives you another date so that you can figure out exactly how many days the flood lasted. It was just a few days over a year. That's not what we normally teach the kids. It was a year-long catastrophic event that changed the face of the earth forever. Okay? This is why I know that. Oh, let me go back over here. Because there's one more thing that I want you to remember about this. Ta-da. There we go. It says, the fountains of the great deep burst forth. That language, those words in the original language, is the same words where it says Moses parted the Red Sea. In other words, something was ripping apart. Things were coming apart. What happens when we get a little slip of the plates, you know, the tectonic plates? We get a little, what happens? Earthquakes, huge tsunamis, Japan disappears, small islands go missing, okay? So if that's what happens with a little slip, what would happen when the plates were actually moving at a very fast pace? you would get massive earthquakes, multiple ones. You get multiple massive tsunamis. You would get volcanic activity. I'm jumping ahead on myself over here. But it would be the scariest time ever. Think about it in Psalm 104. It says, you clothed the earth with floods of water, water that covered even the mountains. At your command, the water fled. At the sound of your thunder, it hurried away. Mountains rose and valleys sank to the levels you decreed. Then you set a firm boundary for the sea so they would never again cover the earth. This was a year-long catastrophic event that would change the face of the earth forever. You would never recognize it after that, okay? So what would be happening during this? You would have massive earthquakes. Massive earthquakes. Here's actually CCTV footage of the Japan tsunami. It happens fast. And that's a kiddie pool compared to what would be happening, okay? And then you would have volcanism, not only above ground, but also underwater. So as we've actually tracked the byproducts of new seafloor being created, we show that there's actually runaway subduction throughout the flood. And so new seafloor is being created. So as this comes apart and it's pushing over, it's subducting underneath a plate. And as this goes down, there has to be new seafloor created over here. And it becomes runaway subduction. The only reason it stops is when the new seafloor hits over here. Here's the other thing. We can look down at the big, massive, huge slabs of rock, okay, these plates, underneath the other one. If it's been millions of years, it should be melted away. It should be the same temperature as everything else down there. If it hasn't been millions of years, it could still be a different temperature because it hasn't been long enough. Take a wild guess what we find when we look at those things. It's a different temperature. It's much cooler than everything else around it. It hasn't been millions of years. So you've got this huge catastrophe, the global flood. And so if I'm kind of picturing in your mind, you might be saying, okay, so you're saying all these sediment layers were laid down by water? Like all the layers? Let me just show you what I'm talking about. We see this everywhere on a massive scale. Okay, this is the chalk cliffs over there in England. Do you notice the pinstripe layering? So the face could be jagged, but the lines, the actual layers are pinstripe. Why do I say pinstripe? Just like on a race car or some cool car we create, a pinstripe is just a very thin line, just straight as you can make it. Some of those guys actually do it just by hand. It's amazing. I used to work in the car industry, so the car paint and all kinds of stuff. Some of those guys are amazing with custom cars. So pinstripe layering says something to us, because if each layer takes 1,000 years to create, you should have crazy erosion patterns. Water coming through, rocks being shot over and hitting, and all this kind of stuff. But what do we find? We find this pinstripe layering. As if something came in, laid down a layer, went back out. Came in, laid down a layer, went back out. Which is exactly what a tsunami wave does. It's exactly what it does. We've actually gone through, if you look at Carved in Stone with Dr. Clary, he actually shows you there was 6 mega sequences to the global flood within the year. Secular scientists say that there were 6 mega floods. But actually, when you look at it, it's actually 6 mega sequences. Here's the scariest part. This should sober you up just a little bit. As people were sitting there, a tsunami would happen. It would go in. The sand, mud, dirt, silt, and everything would overtake certain animals. And people were watching this. And then it would go out. And then it would come back in and bury more animals and people. And it would go out. They were watching their death come to them. That's a sobering thought, isn't it? We're used to thinking about the global flood as this big whoosh, and everybody just drowns, just like that. These people watched their punishment come to them. That's a scary thought. So pinstripe layering. We see the same pinstripe layering all over the world, by water and all the way 500 miles away from the water on a massive scale. Take a look at this. So there's the chalk beds, okay? Now take a look. This is in Ireland, that same pinstripe layering. Again, the face can be jagged, but same pinstripe layering. This is over in Asia, same pinstripe layering. This is in America, same pinstripe. It's a little harder to see, but same pinstripe layering. This is over in Egypt. In Egypt, same pinstripe layering, okay? And then, of course, the Grand Canyon, same pinstripe layering that we see. It's the same stuff every single time. We see the same pattern either right by the water, right by the ocean, or all the way inland on a massive scale. In other words, a global effect, right? Take a look at this. This is from 6 tsunamis. This is the pattern laid down through 6 tsunamis. It's actually stairs, and they had to cut down after the tsunamis came through to be able to use the stairs. So they cut down, saw that pattern. Do you recognize that pattern? It's the same type of pattern you see in the Grand Canyon, but it's on a massive scale way far away from the ocean. Take a look at this. This is right over by the ocean. This is how the water, as it trickles down, actually affects the sand. You can go to the Painted Desert, way far away, hundreds of miles away, nowhere near the ocean, and on a massive scale, you see the same thing. If you take a look at just right at the ocean, a lot of people say that sand doesn't layer. It's kind of larger grains and stuff. It doesn't layer. It actually does. You see the layering of it, and then you see the erosion pattern of it. You've seen that before, haven't you? In the Grand Canyon. That same layering and that same erosion. But it's on a massive scale, nowhere near an ocean. When you actually fly over, if you fly over Colorado, or technically California, you can actually see the mountains. When you see them from above, they look like, let me see if I can go back real quick. Oh, that was really far back. You should play some music or something. When you fly over the mountains, you see this kind of erosion pattern. Mountains look, from above, they look like that, where the water has eroded it out like that. But it's on a massive scale that you would never know. So we see this same pattern, we see this same erosion on a massive scale. The question is, all right, okay, fine, Dave, I understand, I get it, but it has to take millions of years to get all those sediment layers built up. Like, you can't get 2 miles of sediment layers built up in just a year. Let me show you this. Remember, we talked about Mount St. Helens. Well, here's a picture, 2 pictures. One's Mount St. Helens, one's the Grand Canyon. Let me slide them together. You can see that layering is almost exact. Same type of layering. That's Mount St. Helens. Now, here's the question. There's actually 3 different events that happen. So I put this line here, okay? Oh, that line's not supposed to be there. That line should be right up there. I fixed it on the iPad, and apparently it didn't save. Sorry about that. Okay? So there's 3 events here, here, and then here. Take a wild guess. This is almost 3 stories high of actual layering. 3 stories of layering. How long did it take to be laid down? 3,000 years. No. What? 20 years. No. What? Say it again. 2 days. No. Each one of those 3 events took less than a day. The one in the middle took 3 hours. 3 stories in 3 hours. Can I get the Grand Canyon in a year? Yeah, I can. So here's the great part. This is the Grand Canyon. This is a picture that atheists love to show you of the Grand Canyon. Because you're down low, you see the river, and they're like, yeah, the river carved this out over millions of years. But let me tell you something. If water carved this out, in California, you actually had a dam that was about to break, and they had to open up the floodgates, right? That's where you get to open up the floodgates. And so it comes out. It actually breaks through the concrete of the planned floodgate. It comes down, breaks it, it shoots it off to the side. It cuts into the side of the mountain and creates a canyon over here before they could stop it. It took like 3 days. It created an entire canyon straight through hard rock, tore up all the concrete and everything they had built, and that's what shot it off over there. So even in California, you guys know that this can happen. You guys know that can happen. So water goes through, it hits something, and then it shoots off this way. And then it keeps going this way, it hits, and it shoots off that way. It would be this crazy pattern shooting off back and forth like this. It would look a lot like that. And that's an aerial view of the Grand Canyon. Now that looks like it was cut by a massive amount of water, not a little bitty stream or a river, okay? So what did it take? It doesn't take millions of years to get these rock layers. All it takes is the right materials and the right environment. That's it. The right materials and the right environment. Let's take a look at fossils real quick. If we take a look at fossils, we get fossils in two different kinds. We get fossils like in really good preservation, and then sometimes we get them in fossil graveyards. So this is actually pretty good preservation. So this is what you call a mortality plate. So mortality plate is basically a fossil where you have multiple things that have died just all buried together. So there's 16 to 17 fish in here. They're at different levels. You can see where they've scraped down lower to get to some. Here's one that's even lower that could be uncovered even more here. So they're all bunched together. They didn't party together. They weren't at a kegger or anything like that. They actually just got swept up, smashed together, and buried in sediment and died that way. Okay, we have fish and horseshoe crabs and all kinds of different animals that are picked up, smashed together, and buried in sediment. We have these fossils even in our office. And so all these things are buried. You think about it, like this is a Triceratops rib. So this is from Glendive, Montana. So there's actually a third piece to it that hits on this side over here. But if you look at it, and by the way, this table is for you to come up and look at. You can pick up every single thing on this table. Some of it's expensive, some of it's not. I don't care. I want you to be able to pick up and touch creation, okay? So this is a Triceratops rib from Glendive, Montana. See how it's all cracked and crushed, okay? All that stuff. It's because it's smashed together, buried in sediment, and then as the sediment layers build up and build up and build up and build up, it crushes it. We have a mosasaur skull in the middle of our atrium at the Discovery Center, and it is crushed and cracked, and somebody has to go through and glue all that stuff together. Somebody at Glendive actually did this for me. I didn't do it. All right, now I did do this one, okay, I just to redeem myself a little bit. So I dug this one up in Glendive, Montana, and so it came in just over 7 pieces. And so you have to go through, but it looks like this. So it's got mud and dirt and sand and all this kind of stuff on it. You got to scrape it off. There's a little air hammer that you can use to break it off and everything, and it gets down to the bone, and then you actually coat it with a coating. And so this is an ilium. This is the hip structure of a Pachycephalosaurus. Did you guys ever watch Jurassic Park? One of the newer ones, there's one that has like a dome head, and it butts things with its head. That's a Pachycephalosaurus. That's also, if you've ever wondered how dragons and dinosaurs might be, like, is there a connection there? There's actually a Pachycephalosaurus that has the head like a dragon. It has nose horns, mandible horns, and horns off the back of its head. It's called Dracorex hogwartsia. I know what you're thinking. Hogwartsia? See, if you dig it up, you get to name it, and this dude was clearly a Harry Potter fan. So, Dracorex hogwartsia, but it has a dragon's head. Look it up and check it out. It's interesting. So all these things come along, and they're crushed and crumbled underneath the sediment. Here, let's do this. Let's hand this around. You guys just take a look. Look how beautiful. So we've polished this one. Take a look at it and pass it around to somebody, and let everybody take a look at it. These fossils can be absolutely beautiful. This ammonite is polished. So it's actually in rock. It's been broken out of this rock. You can see a little bit of a sheen to the shell. That means that's a real piece of the shell. The shell is kind of luminescent. And then if you look inside here, you can see the dark part where the mud and dirt and everything has been in the chambers, because each one of these is a chamber. But then you see these parts. You can come up and feel this. You can feel where the minerals that were brought inside of it are crystallized. So these parts are crystallized. This is just the mud, dirt, and silt and everything that's gotten in there. So all these things are really beautiful. You can polish them up. They look really nice. They look really nice. And whenever everybody's gotten to check that other one out, just bring it back to me. So these ammonites are really amazing. So again, you can come up here and check these out. See, now I'm going to start talking about dinosaur bones. This is an ungual claw. Let me ask you, are there any kids here? No? Okay. Men, how are your wife's toenails? Are they out of control? Are they out of control? Don't look at her. Don't look at her right now, because you're going to get in trouble, okay? But this is the ungual claw is actually basically the toenail of a hadrosaur. So there's a hadrosaur dinosaur, okay? So his foot would be like this. That's actually his toenail. It's like his claw. It's called the ungual claw, okay? So that's good stuff. So this is a jawbone of a hadrosaur. So this is actually where the teeth come up. So it would sit like this. The teeth actually come up through these little columns right here. So that's the jawbone of a hadrosaur. This is the arm bone of a hadrosaur there. So lots of fun stuff to come look at. They call me Dino Dave because I love talking about dinosaurs. So they make me wear these shirts, and when I talk about dinosaurs, I rebel by wearing dinosaur socks, okay? So there's lots of fun stuff, and if you really want to, I will give you a piece of a hadrosaur dinosaur bone. Okay, so this is why, that's the very thing we're talking about. This fossil graveyard is the very reason why I have all these little pieces, because I have a triceratops frill that's just cracked into pieces. I have hadrosaur bones that are just cracked into pieces because of the global flood. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about that. So we get perfect preservation, okay? Can you get perfect preservation to something like, I'm from Texas, okay? Arkansas, Texas, we're known for roadkill, okay? You kill it, we grill it. I'm just kidding. I've never done that. I've never actually done that. But I'm not saying I wouldn't. I just said I've never done it, okay? That's all I'm saying. So things don't last on the side of the road. Are you guys willing to say that? Yeah? Things don't last, right? They did an experiment where they put pigs in different kinds of water and different depths of water, okay? And they wanted to know, they put a cage over it so large predators couldn't get to it. They wanted to know if things could survive in water, okay? That's day one. Do you want to know what the pig looked like on day 7? Sure. Yeah, all the guys are like, heck yeah, we want to know what it looked like on day 7. Yeah. Well, don't worry, because this is what it looked like on day 7. It's gone. It has been completely eaten and degraded and torn apart, okay? So 7 days is completely disarticulated. In other words, all the things that hold the bones together are gone as well. Little crabs, little bacteria, little fish, all things like that. So things don't last in water. The global flood, right? As a matter of fact, they were they were diving down to the Titanic at one point. Now, well, there was that last attempt to go to the Titanic. Let's not talk about that, okay? But they've gone down the Titanic before, and they were expecting to open up some of those compartments and see all these skeletons just floating around in there, right? Did they find the skeletons? No, because seawater actually disintegrates the bone. So people ask, well, why don't you find human fossils? Well, part of the reason, I would say that there's several reasons, but part of the reason is because they would be able to get up higher more than anybody else. They would be able to see and understand what's happening, get up higher. At some point, even when the water comes up over them, the sediment wouldn't overtake them. Even when you look at Dr. Clary's maps, he's actually mapped out what sediment you would see. There's what you call a bathtub ring. You know, like you're dirty, you're in the bathtub, you drain the water, and you see that little ring. Okay? You don't have to admit it, but just know. All right? All right? Some of you are looking nervous. Do I have to say yes? I'm not asking you to raise your hand or anything. I'm just saying there's a bathtub ring, okay? Same thing happens on Earth. The sediment actually shows a bathtub ring where the water came up, and then as the water drained off, where that sediment settled down, that ring, okay? And so as the water comes off, it takes the people with it, and they go out to sea and they are eaten, bloat, disintegrate, right? So there's a good reason why we don't really find humans, actually. Okay? So then the question is this. I mean, if things don't last in water, how do we get this kind of fossil preservation? Well, they have to be buried in sediment fast enough so they can't get away and deep enough so they can't survive. So if we see fossils that have really good preservation, it has to be fast enough so they can't get away, deep enough so they can't survive. Okay? You think about it. What global catastrophe could bury them fast enough so they couldn't get away, deep enough so they couldn't survive, right? Because the same thing buried all the fish, it buried the dinosaurs, it buried everything. And so we have to remember that. So let's take a look at just some of this preservation. Most of this stuff have hard shells, but you get that same kind of good preservation. What if you went to more delicate things? Look at these things. You've got the leaf, the actual details of the leaf. You've got the details of the insect wings, the palm leaf, and the actual fish and everything in it. We get all that detail. We even get action shots. Okay? Take a look at this. You get all these fish swimming around just buried together. Okay? Here's one. He didn't finish his lunch. I don't know about you guys. I can finish my lunch, okay? You probably noticed that I don't have trouble finishing my lunch, but that's not the point, okay? You're sinners. All right, now, this is, all right, I saw some of your eyes. I saw that, okay. That's fine. It's hurtful, but it's true. Okay, so then you have this ichthyosaur that's actually giving birth. And there's actually another one where it has three. There's one that's kind of torn apart over here. There's one that's kind of right up by the fish. And there's one that is being smashed through the mother because they have a sharp, pointy beak. It's being smashed through the mother. As the sediment crushes it, it smashes through the mother's skin and points out the front. These are action shots. How do you get those kinds of things unless they're buried fast enough so they can't get away and deep enough so they can't survive? And technically, so other things can't get to them as well. You have to have those things. So the question is, don't we date fossils to know that they're millions of years old? Because I can show you all those fossils and you can kind of go, okay, great, Dave, that's a great visual representation, but don't we date fossils? Do we date fossils? Raise your hand if you think that we date fossils to know how old they are. There's a few of you. They would want you to think that. They want you to think that. But they don't. What do? They date the rock around the fossil and then give that date to the fossil. Well, here's the problem. Do you realize that when you send in a sample, they ask you how old that you think it is? Aren't they supposed to tell you that? They want to know how old you think it is because depending on what kind of radioisotope testing they do, they can get wildly different answers. And then they've got to pick which one they think is correct. And if you say it's supposed to be 300,000 years old and they get 352,000 and 780,000 and 1 million, they go, it's supposed to be 300,000. There it is right there. 352,000 was the correct answer. That's a real problem. The trick is that radioisotope dating doesn't work. Number one, it's based on 3 flawed assumptions that you cannot know for certain. Okay? Number 2, when you do radioisotope dating, no matter which test you do, there's lead, there's rubidium, strontium, there's potassium argon, there's all kinds of tests. All of them are based on the half-life, okay? So we know how long it takes for it to decay. And so then you have a parent element and a daughter element. And so the parent element decays into the daughter element. We know how long it takes to decay, okay? So then, thank you so much. I appreciate that. So everybody's touched dinosaur poop now. All right, now, so that is what's called coprolite, okay? Coprolite is actually fossilized dinosaur poop. Now, here's something interesting. We also have something else called paleofeces. There's a learning curve to this. There's also something called paleofeces where it is not completely fossilized, and that's where we do learn more about what dinosaurs ate. And we can learn it from this as well. So technically, you didn't get any germs from this other than the people that touched it before you. So I don't know those people. You do. Maybe you do want to wash your hands. I'm not sure, but that's up to you. So the idea is, even when you do radioisotope testing, no matter which one you do, it's all based off of a half-life. It's all decayed at the same amount of time, okay? They should match up. No matter which one you do, they should match up. They don't match up. None of them match up. That's a real problem. That should be the first clue. Wait a second, this doesn't work. Let me show you how we also know that it doesn't work. We actually can do pass-fail tests. Every time that we do radioisotope testing on a rock that we know the age of, we get it wrong. But we don't just get it wrong, we get it wildly and embarrassingly wrong. Like Dave on the dance floor wrong, okay? Some of you are laughing, that's hurtful, but it is true, okay? I'm not gonna lie to you, it's true. So we did rubidium strontium dating on the Grand Canyon. So what we did was we dated the very bottom basalt flow. So it's a lava flow, okay? And so it's down at the very bottom of the canyon, right? So it's the oldest, and then it goes up, up, and up. More, newer, okay? So down there, that should be the oldest. Then we tested the very newest lava flow. Tested both of them. So the one at the top, this should be hundreds of millions of years younger than the one at the bottom. Let's see what results we got. The bottom was 1.111 billion years old. Okay, well, based off uniformitarianism. All right. When we did the one at the top, hundreds of millions of years younger, 1.143 billion years old. The top, the newest, tested older than the oldest. Does radioisotope dating work? No, it doesn't. It does not work. We did Mount St. Helens. We used multiple dating methods on Mount St. Helens. It actually erupted between 1980 and 1986. We actually tested the newest lava flow in 1996. So we knew the date of the rock should be 10 years old. 10 years old, this is what they got. You ready? When I say this number, I want somebody to yell out, "That's Dave on the dance floor wrong," okay? 350,000 to 2.8 million years old. Thank you very much. That's right. Again, hurtful, but true. Okay. So the problem is radioisotope dating doesn't work. It doesn't matter whether you date the fossils or the rock around it. The radioisotope dating is actually a flawed dating method. Now, there is one method that we're going to talk about that is actually better, and we'll talk about it here in just a little bit. So 352, wow, that one is Dave on the dance floor wrong. So it doesn't take millions of years to create these fossils. You realize there's a place in England, it's a well, all it takes is the right materials and the right environment. It's a water well that it's just soaked with minerals. And people tie teddy bears and telephones and other little toys to this well. And as the water comes up and flows down over it, it fossilizes the teddy bear, hard as rock. Couple months. Doesn't take millions of years. You think about it. The Lincoln Memorial, down underneath Lincoln Memorial, has massive amounts of stalactites and things like that. Lincoln Memorial wasn't built millions of years ago, was it? But it has massive stalactites under it because it doesn't take millions of years. What does it take? It takes the right materials and the right environment. It's as simple as that. Let's talk about DOC, diamonds, oil, and coal. This is interesting. So diamonds are forever, right? Hardest material on earth, okay? We use it to cut glass. We use it to cut other things. It's one of the hardest things on earth. Let me ask you this. Which one is real? Green or white? Green background or white color? White background. Green? White? The truth is they're both real. One was created in a lab. One is natural. But here's the thing. It doesn't mean that it's not a diamond. It is actually chemically the exact same thing. It is carbon. That's all a diamond is carbon, okay? As a matter of fact, this website is lab-created diamonds. I was walking through the airport. I had such an interesting flight over here. I actually I wound up paying for an exit row because the only seat left was like in the middle, right behind the bathroom, and you're sitting like this the whole time. And I'm not the smallest person in the world, right? My shoulders fit over the seats, and so I had to pay for it. So I had nice leg room. I went to the bathroom just before we were landing. I didn't realize what a bad idea that was. I went back there. That is I fly a lot. Not a lot, but I fly a good amount. That is the smallest bathroom. I don't know what you guys do with California planes. That was the smallest bathroom I've ever been. I literally could not put my shoulders back like that. I couldn't put my arms down by my side. It was that small. And so then I was wrapping up, okay, to put it politely, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, we're about to land. And all of a sudden my feet come up off the floor. There is so much turbulence. I'm literally, of course I can't move. I'm just standing there like this, and I'm just like bobbing up and down. My feet are coming up off the floor. I'm thinking, I'm going to land in the toilet at one of these times. This is not going to be good. So anyway, but that had nothing to do with it. I just had to tell you that story. So I'm walking through the airport. There's actually an advertisement for lab-grown diamonds in your airport right now. Exact same material, chemically the same. They are diamonds. As a matter of fact, this website, you can actually, because just carbon, guess what? You're a carbon-based life form. You can actually take your grandmother's ashes and send it to them, and they will make her a diamond. So ladies, if your boyfriend ever comes up to you and says, I want to marry you, this is my grandmother diamond, and you say, oh, it belonged to your grandmother. He says, no, it is my grandmother. I'm just saying, pray about it. Pray about it just a little bit. Think about it, okay? So these lab-created diamonds, here's the interesting part. They actually use them for industrial purposes because they're actually harder than natural diamonds, okay? You don't need millions of years. They make these diamonds within days. Within days. Some of them within hours, depending on the size. They just need the right amount of pressure and the right amount of heat. Guess what the global flood gives you? It gives you a lot of pressure and a lot of heat. You got all that volcanism coming up. You got all the sediment pressing down. What do you have? A lot of pressure and a lot of heat. And that's exactly what you need for a lot of this stuff. So diamonds don't take millions of years. They just take the right materials, and they just take your grandmother. Okay? That's all it takes. So what about oil? When you talk about oil, I was actually asked at one point, a youth kid said, hey, they're saying we're running out of oil. What's going to happen if we run out of oil? Well, we're actually not running out of oil. There's actually oil still in the ground and all over the place. It's a matter of how cost effective it is to get to it. That's the real key. How cost effective is it? But of course, everybody thinks that oil is fossil fuels. There's a lot of it is a vegetation. And there's some like hard shells. Like there's a place over near Mexico in California. Oh, I'm in California. There's a place right over here somewhere, just offshore, where there's a lot of bones and shells and stuff, and heat. It's actually producing oil. Back in the 70s, they figured this out, that it's still producing oil. It didn't take millions of years. It's still producing it. They know that it doesn't take millions of years. As a matter of fact, if you read the article, the scientists basically go, yeah, we think it might take maybe thousands of years. We're not really sure. They don't know. Here's the problem with oil is that there is bacteria that eats oil. When they go down and get oil, they find the bacteria that eats it. If the oil was millions of years old, guess what? It would no longer be there because it would be eaten, right? Not only that, we can actually find a signature of oil of where it comes from. So if you have continents that come together, you can actually find that this oil has the signature of this of this rock or this land over here. So there's lots of interesting things that you never hear about oil. But the bottom line is, if oil was millions of years old, you'd be out of it right now. It's still being produced. It can still be produced right now. Not really fast, but a lot faster than millions of years. Actually, as a matter of fact, MIT can make oil out of garbage. Organic garbage, MIT, same thing. Right materials, right environment, you've got oil. The question is, how cost effective is it? Doesn't take millions of years, just the right materials and the right environment. South Africa has a whole lot of coal, but they don't have a whole lot of oil. But within hours, they can take coal and make it into oil. They produce over 100,000 barrels in a day using this method. Doesn't take millions of years, it's just the right materials and the right environment. What about coal itself? If you take a look at coal, they've actually found catalysts. This was actually Argonne Labs. Some of the scientists found that there was catalysts that could actually make coal faster. There's a volcanic ash that actually acts as a catalyst that they find throughout different coal seams. Not all of them, but throughout different coal seams. Gosh, what would have been shot up into the air with all the volcanism? Whole bunch of ash lays down on top of vegetation. All coal is vegetation. I was speaking over in Scotland, and the pastor of one of the churches comes up to me afterwards and goes, I used to work in the coal industry. We would find entire logs. Some of them were coalified, but you could see the actual shape and everything of the log. Some of them were not even fully coalified. Okay? So this coal is actually made much faster, because the theory was you had to take millions of years for all this peat moss. They considered peat moss to be what made it. And then it decays over millions of years, makes this goopy, soupy mess. And then over more millions of years, it hardens into coal. We know that is completely wrong now, completely wrong. Not only that, we've been making coal in labs. There's a guy in the 1970s making coal in a lab. He said that there's a guy, you can actually see him on his Genesis history. He was making different kinds of rock. He said coal was the one that took the longest. It took 3 weeks. Does it take millions of years? No. None of this stuff takes millions of years. That's the kicker. We've known for so long it takes the right materials and the right environment. So last but not least, okay, so we can make it fast, but how old is what we already have? And we're going to wrap up here real quick. How old is what we already have? That's the question. Well, I told you we're going to look at another kind of radioisotope dating that is actually a good kind of dating. It's a pass-fail. It's not going to necessarily give me an exact date, but it's going to tell me whether evolution is even viable, okay? And that is carbon-14 dating. If you talk about carbon-14 dating, it is considered pass-fail. So if you detect carbon-14 in a sample, so I get a piece of rock, some kind of organic material, whether it's pollen, wood, coal, diamonds, because it's carbon, just all kinds of stuff. I send it into the lab. If I detect carbon-14, because it decays so quickly, so a lot of all the other elements are millions of years for the half-life. For half of it decay is millions of years. For half of C14 to decay is 5,700 years, which means that by the time you hit 80,000 to 100,000 years old, you cannot see any more carbon-14. You won't be able to detect any. So reverse that now, okay? If you detect C14, it means that it is less than 100,000 years old. See, this is the pass-fail that I'm talking about. Because evolution has to have millions of years, right? Everybody nod your head, yes, please. Okay, yes, evolution has to have millions of years. Because remember, if they tell you that you evolved from pond scum in 6,000 years, you're going to call them stupid, okay? And rightly so. So they have to have millions of years, millions and billions of years. This is how they argue. Well, hey, I can't throw my iPhone into the bathtub and wait a million years and it becomes a human, okay? And what do they say? Well, but given enough time. And you're like, okay, technically, no one's lived 1 billion years, so I guess technically we don't know for certain, okay? But that's how they get you. They say, well, give it enough time. And it's a trick. That's all it is. It's a trick to make you think, oh, well, I don't really know what would happen over millions of years, so I guess maybe. But it's a lie. Don't let them lie to you. So this is why I'm telling you this, that you can't let them lie to you. C14, if they detect C14, it's less than 100,000 years. If they detect no C14, it is over 100,000 years. So it's a pass-fail. You ready? So less than 100,000 years if you detect C14. Over 100,000 years if you detect no C14, okay? So we actually did a test. We did the rate group. It was called like radioisotope dating in the age of the earth. I don't know how they got rate out of that, but that's not the point. So it was a bunch of scientists, okay? And they actually wanted to test radioisotope dating. So they took coal. Now they took the coal from the U.S. Department of Energy samples. All the samples were over 1 million years old. There was 10 samples tested. How many samples had C14 in it? All 10 of them, absolutely right. All samples had detectable C14, which means they have to be, what? Less than 100,000 years old, exactly. So what did the evolutionists say? Y'all actually contaminated your samples. That's how you got C14 in it, okay? So y'all didn't know what you're doing. First of all, we didn't do it. We sent it off to evolutionary labs that were doing all the evolutionist stuff. So if they messed it up, that's their fault, not ours. But we said, fine, we'll do diamonds. You cannot contaminate a diamond sample. It's impossible to contaminate diamond sample. So we did diamonds. So they did what? They pulled from 4 different African mines, all samples over 1 million years old, 12 total samples tested. How many samples had C14? You got it. All 12 samples had detectable C14. We didn't just do it in coal. We didn't just do it in diamonds. We did it in wood, organic materials. We did it in dinosaur bones. You think about it. We've been testing dinosaur bones for quite a while, and guess what? We're finding they are much younger than 66 million years old, right? I do an entire talk on dinosaurs, so I'm really trying to stop from telling you more about that. Okay. So dinosaurs, we find dinosaurs in the Bible. We find dinosaurs in history, right? You think about it. The word dinosaur was created in what year? Does anybody know what year? Oh, this is worth a piece of hadrosaur bone. Does anybody know what year the word dinosaur was created by Sir Richard Owen? 1800. Wait, what was it? 1841. I would throw the dinosaur bone at you, but I don't think I can throw that far. Okay, I throw like a girl. So anyway, here's the point. So the word dinosaur is created in 1841. What year was the King James Bible translated into English? Anybody know? Same guy. Have you been to these talks before? What in the world's happening right now? I don't know what's going on. So yeah, 1611. So the word dinosaur wasn't even created for over 200 years after the Bible is translated in English. So would we expect the word dinosaur to be in the Bible? We wouldn't expect the word jeans to be in the Bible either, would we? Or Pokemon Go or anything like that, right? And so nowadays, the evolutionists have got people so scared they wouldn't dare put the word dinosaur in the Bible because the evolutionists will come along and say that they're crazy, right? So I don't even know where I was going with that. But anyway, the point is this. We find dinosaurs in the Bible, but the word they're using in the Bible is tenin, okay? Big, scary beast is basically what it is, like sea monster, serpent, dragon, basically something I don't want to cuddle with, okay? That's really the definition of tenin. And then, of course, God brags about his dinosaurs. Here I am going off on this. God brags about his dinosaurs, behemoth, in Job 40. The only thing that could be described that way is a sauropod dinosaur. We can go through that one of these days. But here's the thing. We actually test dinosaur bones. This is a brow horn of a triceratops that they've tested. It's not just us that tested it. This is an entire list of dinosaur bones that another group tested that aren't even creationist. But they've already figured out that this whole evolution thing is bunk. So they actually started testing it. They were sending it off to university labs. Eventually, they had to stop because the university lab figured out what they were doing and said, we won't be part of your unscientific agenda, and stopped testing them for them. Okay, they had to go to several different places. All of these had detectable C14. They went over to Asia and actually presented this in a conference. Everybody was like, wow, that's amazing. And then a week later, all their stuff was pulled from the website. And so they called them up. They were like, hey, why is all of our stuff pulled from the website? And they were like, well, because there's no way that's true. They were like, well, what process did we not use correctly? Or what numbers were wrong? They said, nothing, but there's just no way that could be true. But remember what we said in the very beginning. The answer will never be God for them, right? And if dinosaurs lived at the same time as man, not in the same place necessarily, but at the same time as man, then the Bible is true and evolution is wrong, and that will never be the answer. Here's something really quick. Here's something really interesting if you think about it. Okay, so the average date of all these dinosaur bones is 29,402 years, okay? Evolution tells you that everything was laid down over millions of years, 100,000 years, 1 million years, 200,000 years, or 200 million years, all laid out far apart. C14 tells a completely different story and tells the story of the global flood. 29,000 years, okay? This is a paddlefish, okay? This is a fossil that we have hanging in our offices. It's about 15 feet from my office door. And I actually found them in the St. Louis Aquarium. I didn't realize they were still alive. I didn't know. They're freaky looking. That's what it looks like. Wow. It is weird looking. Like, I don't ever want to see that thing in the water while I'm in the water. Okay? And I have a video of it at the St. Louis Aquarium. It's almost translucent. You can like see through its body. It's really weird. But we actually tested it, and we have the test back from the University of Georgia, radiocarbon analysis report. This is 2013. This right here is the paddlefish, 33,000 years old. We had a piece of hadrosaur, 28,000 years old. All basically averaging out to about that 29,000 mark. Okay, take a look at this. They found human footprints in the white sands in New Mexico. And they were like, hey, how old are these? So they dug a trench down beside them, and they went down, and they got pollen, and then they C14 tested the pollen, and then gave the footprints the date of the pollen at 23,000 years. Do you realize that everything is showing in that really close range, or almost all in that 29,000 range? What that means is everything was laid down quickly. C14 is still not an accurate number above about 3,000 years. But what it's showing you is that it was laid down rapidly, one after the other, which is exactly what would have happened in the global flood. Evolution tells a completely different story, and the earth, what we find in the ground, doesn't back it up. Evolution says it has to be millions of years old. We're finding C14 in everything. If we find C14 in everything, that means that it is less than 100,000 years old, and evolution is destroyed at its very core. That's what we just did. We just destroyed evolution at its very core. Because it doesn't take millions of years. It just takes the right materials and the right environment. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for them bearing with me, Lord. I just pray that the information that I gave would just resonate in our hearts, Lord. That it would not just sit there and we walk away, but it would inspire us to, number one, trust your word more. Number two, to live boldly for you today. To know that this isn't just for us, but it's for other people. To be able to go out and share this information, to break down those foundations, those barriers, and to be able to reach people for you, Lord, that they would have a relationship with you just like we do. Lord, make us bolder than our fear. Make our faith larger than our fear. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen.